On the margins of an annual security meeting in Munich this past weekend, Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol and his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Marco Rubio and Takeshi Iwaya, respectively, reaffirmed their resolve to rid the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons, putting to rest fears of a potential shift in America's policy on North Korea's nuclear ambitions. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, February 18th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we touch upon the trilateral commitment to root out North Korea's nuclear weapons ambitions as South Korea, the U.S. and Japan reaffirmed their security partnership for regional stability at their first three-way meeting since the return of the Trump administration. For this, I have Sebastien Falletti with French daily Le Figaro here in the studio. Sebastien, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation.
I also have Shreyas ready with American website NK News. Shreyas, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
We'll start with you, Shreyas. Let's start with details of the trilateral meeting among top diplomats of Seoul, Washington and Tokyo. In Munich this past weekend, what was discussed and what were some of your takeaways from that meeting?
Well, perhaps the biggest takeaway from the meeting was the three foreign ministers reiterating their shared commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. Now, this is something that has been in question for a while, particularly with the Trump administration. There have been occasionally some statements this way, that way, not entirely reassuring to South Korea and Japan and other countries perhaps, but that was one thing that they emphasized, as well as the unshakable trilateral alliance, or trilateral partnership rather, which is something, again, with Trump over the last few months, there have been repeated concerns. Is he going to be there for Washington's allies? And that is something that they were very keen to emphasize, saying trilateral exercises and deterrence against North Korean threats will continue. Alongside that, they also want to condemn North Korea's human rights abuses and pledge to continue cooperation there, call for the return of abductees, detainees and prisoners of war held by North Korea, along with efforts to counter its other threats, so cyber threats, sanctions evasion, lots of activities. There was also, of course, some focus on non-North Korea themes, so talking about cooperation when it comes to threats across the Indo-Pacific region, including the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, and perhaps of relevance to South Korea and Japan's other interests. They were talking about cooperation on continuing economic cooperation in crucial areas, including emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, and of course other areas, for example, energy. So I think in South Korea's case, liquefied natural gas was a key priority. But I think fundamentally, though, the biggest takeaway was trilateral cooperation is still here to stay, at least on paper.
Right, and staying with that, Sebastien, does this latest trilateral commitment to ridding the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons eradicate concerns about a potential shift in U.S. policy with regard to North Korea? Or do you envision the Trump administration accepting North Korea as a nuclear power going down the road?
Well, the short answer will be it probably didn't fully reassure Seoul on this critical issue, because we've heard conflicting messaging from Washington since the beginning of the Trump administration. Of course, as Shreyas said, this is quite a relief to Seoul and Japan and many allies, US allies, that actually there was this meeting in Munich, but there was also a G7 foreign minister meeting where it was clearly stated that so-called complete denuclearization of North Korea was still the goal envisaged by all these allies, and it's insignificant that the US, who was in the room, signed up to this. So that's clearly a sign that there's some continuity. But at the same time, we have a new US president who, on the very first day of his office, said that North Korea was a nuclear power. He used that word, So there's a lot of ambiguity about why use that word. We know with Donald Trump also semantic can be sometimes a bit slippery. To what extent he used it in purpose, but it sounds very much like a signal sent to Kim Jong-un. We know he has a personal relationship with Kim Jong-un during his first mandate. He met him at least on 3 occasions. They had a very deep exchanges, and during his campaign, President Trump said he wanted to resume high-level contact with him. He was open to relaunch his diplomacy. So all this said, of course, it's normal in Seoul, but also in Tokyo, but also among other allies in Europe, there is a concern that the new Trump administration is going to reopen that file with a fresh approach and potentially do a kind of aggiornamento where you basically say now this strategy has failed. We need to look at North Korea in different light. And to finish, I mean, North Korea is exactly saying this. They made a statement just a few hours ago saying that basically the U.S. policy, the U.S. statement is, I quote them, outdated and absurd, which means basically they are basically saying this is going nowhere. We need to open a new chapter, start on a new basis. So the whole question is to what extent Trump administration is going in that direction. For now, they're playing ambiguity, but we know that Donald Trump loves to use ambiguity as a leverage.
Right. And in the meantime, Shreyas, just for the sake of some perspective, before we delve any further, could you walk us through the estimates of nuclear warheads per country as shared by the Federation of American Scientists?
Right. So according to the Federation of American Scientists, as of last year, at least early last year, they estimated that 9 countries possessed more than 12,000 nuclear warheads. Now, obviously, the numbers vary quite significantly between those countries. Since we're on the topic of North Korea's denuclearization, perhaps we can start with that. So North Korea, at least on paper, is at the very bottom of the list with 50 warheads according to their estimates. But at the same time, we should bear in mind with North Korea, there are no absolutes. No one's entirely clear what's going on inside the country. So the Federation also estimated that North Korea has enough fissile material to produce as many as 90 nuclear warheads. But again, it could be even greater because this was all before Kim Jong-un and state media revealed the existence of an entirely new uranium enrichment plant a few months ago. And so it's quite possible that that estimate may be revised again this year to suggest North Korea may have even more. But for now, at least, North Korea is at the bottom of that list. If we're talking about the heavy hitters, though, right at the top, you've got the old Cold War powers. So Russia with more than 5,500 nuclear warheads, and the US not too far behind with more than 5,000. And then you've got, in a distant third, China with about 500 warheads. And I think that tells you just the gap between the US and Russia and the rest of the world. So I think for now, at least, that if there is any danger, it's going to come from those 2 or 3 countries.
Right. And in recent times, Shreyas, US President Donald Trump, he called for nuclear arms control talks with Russia and China. Could you tell us a bit about his intentions?
Yes. Well, part of his rhetoric has, of course, been about the sheer threat posed by these weapons. He said that that if these countries' stockpiles alone could destroy the world 50, maybe even 100 times over. So on one hand, part of it is about the destructive potential. But when it comes to Donald Trump, as we've often seen in other cases, cost is perhaps a big factor as well. So he stressed that all 3 countries could do with cutting their military budgets, maybe on half their budgets, just by reducing their emphasis on nuclear development. And he said, essentially, we're spending a lot of money that we don't need to be doing. So it's saying we already have all these missiles. why produce more nuclear warheads? So that is perhaps the overarching factor. And perhaps we can say that at some stage he will get down to this, or at least he will push for it. But for now, at least, even Trump himself admits the big priority is dealing with the war in Ukraine and conflict in the Middle East. Eventually, though, he might want to address this, perhaps also with an eye on the threat from China, which he has warned could exceed or match the U.S. count in as soon as 5 to 6 years from now.
Right, and against the backdrop of this call by Mr. Trump for nuclear arms talks with Russia and China, quite a number of pundits, Sebastien, have been weighing in with contrasting views about whether or not the Trump administration will lead to more nuclear weapons or less nuclear weapons, or fewer nuclear weapons in the world. Could you share these conflicting views with us, including the reasons and, of course, your thoughts as well?
Yeah, of course, this is a crucial question, because if we hear Donald Trump since his first day in office, he introduced himself as a peacemaker, someone who wants to bring peace to this world. He set his eye on this goal. And what he mentioned in the last few days that Shreyas talked about, that he even suggested that, yeah, we should all reduce our weapon with a cost in mind. Well, this offer sounds very generous and sounds also like a gesture of openness, but we should bear in mind the context. I mean, it's been years that the U.S., this is mainly targeting probably to China, and it's been years that the U.S. are trying to drag China into the negotiation. There's been some arms control negotiation between Russia and the US since the Cold War. And the US have been recently trying to bring China to the table because they are concerned about China military development. But so far, Beijing doesn't want to join them. Beijing is saying, as Shreyas said, you are still, guys, far ahead. I mean, China has only 500 warheads compared to several thousand for the two other countries. So China is just saying, wait, we are not in the same league. But at the same time, the US are very concerned about rapid development in China. China could be tripling its number of warhead by 2035, was saying a recent report by the Pentagon. So, I mean, I think this suggestion by Donald Trump has very little chance to be accepted in Beijing. And to the broader question that you ask, whether Trump could reduce the nuclear threat in this world, I mean, this is, of course, a very speculative question at this stage. But there's a lot of conflicting view on this, because at the same time, we are seeing that the way he treats his own allies, the way he's challenging even NATO, the way he's sending conflicting messaging to Korea, to Japan. I mean, this could also encourage domestic race for nuclear weapons. We know that in South Korea, there has been a growing number of people, including President Yoon, who mentioned the possibility for South Korea one day to go nuclear. And of course, if you don't trust the US umbrella anymore, that might encourage you to go that way. So this is still a very early stage, but the way Trump is going to deal with his own ally might have a lot of implication for that nuclear question. And the next 4 years will be very important in that respect.
Right, for sure. Shreyas, last week you covered the concerns of a senior U.S. military official about North Korea's ICBM advances, and these concerns, of course, were addressed by North Korea, according to an article by Reuters soon after. Let's start off with details about your coverage, and then, of course, North Korea's response.
So this is essentially the commander of the U.S. military's Northern Command, Gregory Geo. So he warned that the Hwasong-19 solid propellant missile, which North Korea first tested in October, has the potential to hit targets all across the mainland U.S. Now, that's something that greatly increases their threat, but at the same time, the danger is also in the nature of the missile as a solid fuel missile, which essentially shortens the time needed to prepare it. And his warning was, if they launch one of these, if they launch several of these, it would greatly reduce the U.S. Response time, the time to be able to detect and deal with such threats. And this is something that the U.S. has been concerned about some time as North Korea greatly expands its capabilities, its array of nuclear-capable missiles. And this is something that will continue even further because Kim Jong-un has repeatedly emphasized in recent years, particularly in the last few months, they want to be able to expand their nuclear arsenal. They want to greatly increase it and move from just being able to develop them and test them to having a full strategic reserve. This is obviously of great concern to the US, particularly after Kim Jong-un in late December also said North Korea would introduce its most hostile anti-US policy so far. So that's something that obviously was weighing on General Keo's testimony, particularly with the recent rhetoric. Now, North Korea has since responded to his words in very predictable fashion, just as they often do. They tried to frame their nuclear buildup as a justified response to US threats. They, as Sebastien pointed out, they just did that again today. They said, we are going to remain a nuclear state. We're going to continue developing nukes just because we are worried about US-led threats. They're the reason we have this nuclear problem on the Korean peninsula in the first place. So once again, they released a statement on Saturday saying we're not going to stop our nuclear development, and we need this because it's the only way we can protect ourselves from the US and its allies, including South Korea and Japan.
You're right. Staying with this, Sebastien, as Shreyas mentioned, and as you mentioned earlier, North Korea, it's been escalating its hardline rhetoric and actions, even as Mr. Trump has spoken of reaching out to Kim Jong-un. Now, in the most recent display, if I may, of defiance, North Korea began dismantling a reunion center for separated Korean families. What do you suppose is the purpose of such bellicose rhetoric and actions? Do you suppose North Korea is seeking leverage ahead of a potential meeting with Mr. Trump?
Well, I mean, there's two tracks, because there's also, let's not forget the peninsula track, which is the inter-Korean relationship. I mean, what is Kim Jong-un doing now is in line with his big policy shift he announced last year, where he basically declared now South Korea as a so-called hostile state, and basically turning his back on the goal of reunification. This is quite a departure from the historical departure from the traditional policy of North Korea. We've seen last year they started exploding the roads connecting the two Koreas. So what's happening now with this Center for Family Reunion is like another stretch in that direction, telling Seoul, South Korea, we don't want to have any contact with you guys. We're not anymore brother. We're not anymore in connection. We're not anymore a big family. We don't want to hear anything about you. So that's a signal sent to Seoul, and we should bear in mind also that the political situation in Seoul currently is very fluid. We don't know what's going to happen in the coming months with a potential new election, a potential new administration. So also probably North Korea is watching that very closely and preparing potentially for the next move. And then, as you mentioned, there's of course the more bigger implication when it comes to the US. It's also part of this strategy of ramping up pressure on the international community, on the US, showing its determination and hoping to maybe get attention from the US and potentially open the door to some talk. But I think it's very early days, and also, of course, the US is very busy on other fronts, so it's just probably the beginning of a chapter of tension.
Right. Shreyas, then, based on your coverage of North Korea-related news, what prerequisites do you believe need to be in place to perhaps nudge North Korea back to the negotiating table?
Well, the short version is North Korea has no intention of returning to negotiations, at least as long as the US South Korea and Japan and other countries insist on complete denuclearization. That is a term they will not accept. They have cemented their irreversible nuclear status in their laws at this stage, and they do not really see any need to change that. A part of the factor is also they don't really trust other countries to be able to live up to it. We've seen certainly South Korea and the U.S. as administrations change, they often change policies. Trump himself backed out from Barack Obama's Iran nuclear deal previously. So for them, they're not going to risk what they see as a nuclear deterrent that keeps the regime safe. But at the same time, perhaps, let's say, if they see room for flexibility from other sides, they may perhaps be willing to eventually come back. Also depends on the situation in North Korea. They certainly could do with some economic support. So if they see perhaps partial sanctions relief as an option on the table, they might consider it. Also, perhaps the U.S., if Donald Trump says denuclearization is going nowhere, how about we head toward arms control or some other method that offers partial concessions in exchange for partial measures from North Korea? It may be possible, but the bottom line at the moment is no side is quite willing to budge, particularly North Korea.
Right, so much uncertainty going forward then. Right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Shreyas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you very much.
And Sebastien, thank you very much for your insights.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. We see you back here same time tomorrow.